Hi there. Welcome to my podcast for Christian women, Treasure for Your Heart, where I give you a bit of treasure to tuck into your heart and take into your day. I'm Renee White. I'm a Christian life coach for women, and I help Christian women break free from things like stress, anxiety, shame, guilt, unforgiveness, anger, and fear, while building a deeper, more intimate relationship with Jesus. And I'm also author and creator of the Peace Secured Study for Christian Women, which you can find on Amazon right now. And Peace Secured is all about learning to let Jesus calm your storms, okay? And I will put a link where you can learn more about Peace Secured in the description below this podcast. Or you can go to peacesecured.com to learn more about the study. All right, do you ever worry about whether or not you are praying within God's will? On today's podcast, I'm going to talk about what it means to pray within God's will, and what you can do when you're afraid that you might not agree with His will. Okay, so stick around for today's heart treasure. All right, welcome. What does it mean to pray in God's will? Let's look at Luke 22:41 through 42. And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw. And having fallen on the knees, he was praying, saying, Father, if you are willing, take away this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. Okay, so I recently had a client ask me how we can know that we're praying within God's will. And what was confusing her was that she was seeing some Christians simply praying, your will be done, while other Christians were praying for specific outcomes, even to the extent of demanding that the Lord act on their behalf to bring that outcome about. So how can we know that we're praying within God's will? All right, well, first off, we know that God's will is that we would be redeemed and reconciled to Him. Okay, we know that. But my client's question was more about understanding God's will, in our day-to-day lives and within our day-to-day prayers. So her question brought to mind a devotional I read once that talked of a theological axiom concerning the will of God. And it goes like this. If it's Monday and you want to know what God's will is for Tuesday, just wait until Wednesday. And the writer's point is that God's will is active, always ongoing, and always being worked out, right? So I think what's hard for us to accept is that God's will is sometimes going to involve discomfort or pain. And let's face it, it's natural for us to want to avoid things like discomfort and pain, right? But we also know that it's not possible to live a life free from these things. God tells us that in this world we will have trouble. So I'm in no way attacking the name and claim it folks, because that's not my place to judge them. But the problem with using prayer to demand God do something is that we cannot truly know His will on some things until it all plays out, right? And then we see the outcome. So let me ask it this way. If you made the decision that something was God's will, and therefore you prayed for that outcome, but then received the opposite, would you then conclude that somehow God got His own will wrong? Of course not, right? So this is why we need to pray by asking Him for what we think is best based on what we know about Him. And yes, the closer we get to Him, the clearer His will becomes. But even more than that, the closer we get to Him, the more that we trust Him, even when we don't understand His ways or His will. Okay, so I don't want you to ever be afraid to ask. Let's say you have a sick family member. Would you ever pray that your family member stays sick and not survive, or just not pray for them at all? No way, right? Of course you'd pray that your family member is healed and lives. Makes complete sense that you'd pray this way. So I don't want you to ever feel bad about asking such things. But it may happen that God allows a different outcome than what you hoped and prayed for. And if God's will turns out different from what we desire and pray for, well, then that is our opportunity to trust Him and trust that His will is being done. And we can know and believe that His will is being done because, we know when we believe that, well, nothing happens outside of God's will, right? Okay, so what if we can't accept His will? If we look deeply, I think we'll find, that our fear is less about knowing what or how to pray and more about being afraid that we won't like or accept God's answer to our prayers. Okay, even though we know that his answer is his will, right? And what I mean is that it's not so much that we're afraid we might be praying outside of his will, but rather that we're afraid that his answer might be outside of what we want. And let's be really honest. If we struggle to accept God's will after the fact, meaning after we pray and get a different outcome than we prayed for, what makes us think that we would accept his will any better if we knew it before we prayed? Okay, so here's the thing. God is teaching us to trust him. What matters is making sure we are growing closer to Christ so that we can better understand his will and learn to trust him more and more for those times where his will doesn't seem to make sense to us. His ways are not our ways, and they won't always make sense to us. His will won't always be comfortable for us, and so we must learn to trust him more and more. I want to thank you so much for tuning in today, and I hope you've been blessed by today's heart treasure. And I hope that you will tuck it in your heart, take it into your day, and bless someone else with it. And please don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I will talk to you soon on the next Treasure for Your Heart. God bless you.